Hello everybody, inferential stats testing. Okay, what this is, we're hypothesis testing in experiments and correlations. You don't use them for observations and self-reports, they're just for experiments and correlations. So we're essentially trying to find out which one are we accepting, the alternate or the null. Are we rejecting the null, are we accepting the null, are we rejecting the alternate, are we accepting the alternate. So, what we're going to cover, how you carry them out, which stats test to use, type 1 and type 2 errors, and hypothesis testing. So, first of all, something that you should know about stats testing, it's all about the null. Even though we think of our main hypothesis as being our alternate hypothesis, actually, it's all about the null. Status Quo, classic rock band for those of you who've never heard of them, well, it's nothing to do with them, but they're called status quo. What status quo means is what we currently know. Okay, the status quo is the knowledge we have about the world at the moment. It's probably not going to be the same in 100 years. The status quo. The null is the status quo. The null says smoking will not have any effect on your health. And as you can see from this old school advert from the 50s, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Okay, and there's lots of smoking adverts from back then that suggest that cigarettes are good for your health. So when people came along and went, hang on a sec, let's have a test to see if we can reject that null. Smoking will not significantly impact your health. Can we reject that statement and say, yes, smoking actually does impact your health? Okay, and of course lots of research came out that rejected that null and accepted the alternate hypothesis that said it's bad for you. Okay, and this is broadly what a stats test does. It is an objective judgment on your findings. It's not you judging whether it's significant or not. You put your raw data in to, for example, a Man-Whitney test, and it spits out whether you can reject your null or whether you have to accept your null. So you haven't found a significant difference, or you have found a significant difference. If it's a correlation, you'd be using the Spearman's, and it'd be a significant correlation or not a significant correlation. Okay, so that's why we have them. Your means for a piece of research show you a difference, but is it significant? That's what the inferential statistics tells you. Okay, so here's a little illustration. Let's say you've got a couple of engineers and we've got a question for them. They happen to be a part of our group who are running through a forest, running away from some lions. We've got two bridges. Which bridge are we going to take? They both look pretty dodgy. So we ask our engineers to do some calculations. How strong are the bridges? Which one should we take? What's the chance of them collapsing? There's always a risk that you're wrong. What's our margin for error? They're going to decide beforehand what risk are we happy to take as a group crossing that water. Okay, there's always a chance, even with the best built bridge in the world, there's always a chance it'll collapse. There might be an earthquake on the way across, you might not be able to see some of the cracks, whatever, there's always a chance. But what risk are we happy with taking? So, let's say they're happy with a 5% risk of being wrong, i.e. 95% sure that they're right. So all of these calculations that they've got there, let's say they're going to make them judged on the way that they evaluate bridges from what they've learned at university, but there's a 5% chance that they might be wrong. So they run with that. They decide beforehand, let's run our stats test at a risk level of 5%. Because guess what? If they run it at a risk level of 0%, probably we ain't crossing either of the bridges and we're going to get eaten by lions, because neither of them look particularly 100% safe. Okay, so they're happy with a 5% risk. They run the calculations, they run the stats tests, and so they're using a probability level of 0.05. That means if you move the decimal place 2 to the right, that means they are using a 5% chance of being wrong, of error. They find this bridge is safe, this bridge is not safe. They've categorized it. Safe, not safe. what they're saying is there is equal to or less than 5% chance of collapse, okay, but no greater. There's not a 6% or 7%, 8%, 9%. There's not a greater than 5% chance of that bridge collapsing. Whereas, so there's a 95% chance of that staying strong. On this side, there's a greater than 5% chance of that collapsing. They don't know exactly what level, but there's a greater than 95% chance. So there's less than 95% chance of it staying strong. So obviously, what we're going to do, we're going to go across this bridge. And there is a 5% chance of collapse, but it's better than a greater than 5% chance of collapse. So we ask them, have you made an error? They recommend that you cross that one, but they say, but there is a less than 5% chance we've made an error. But they are putting their hands up and saying, there is somewhere below 5% chance that we've made an error. Okay, but it's a small chance, 4%, 3% chance that this bridge is collapsed. The chances are you're going to get across safe. For this one, they recommend you don't cross, and there's a less than 5% chance that they've made an error in making that recommendation. Okay, so it works either way. They recommend you don't cross, and there's less than 5% chance that they've made an error in their calculations. Now, what about psychologists? That's an engineer. Psychologists do exactly the same thing. So let's say we're testing, are firstborn identical twins cleverer than secondborn identical twins? Do they have higher IQs? The alternate hypothesis would be second-born identical twins, this is an example of one, should be an S on the end, apologies, will have significantly higher IQ than first-born identical twins measured on an established IQ test. Good bit of operationalisation in the brackets, everybody. Null hypothesis, second-born identical twins will not have significantly higher IQ than first-born identical twins. Any difference will be due to chance. Okay, so really, as I said before, we're testing this. At the moment, we don't think there is a difference in IQ between first and second-born identical twins. So we're testing the null hypothesis, really. If we can reject that, it means that my twin brother may well either be happy or unhappy. He is the firstborn, so he's going to be unhappy if I'm accepting my one-tailed alternate hypothesis. Right. What do they find? There's two different examples of research here for you. One uses 200 participants, one uses 20 participants. The chances are you'd be doing this piece of research because it's quite hard to find 100 sets of identical twins. But there we go. There's two different pieces of research. This one, with the p-value set at 0.05, so with that stats test set at 0.05, it comes out as being not being significant. P is less than 0.05. That means that there's greater than 95% chance of being significant. Less than 5% chance of not being significant. Okay, for this one, there's less than 5% chance of being significant. So what we're going to do for both of those, so so how do we express that? P is equal to or less than 0.05. That, as a researcher, is what you're looking for. Because if you see that, if you find that in your stats, then you know that you're going to accept your alternate hypothesis and you're going to reject your null. And although we shouldn't care either way as researchers, actually secretly researchers got more chance of being published if they accept their alternate. So they'd be quite happy. They're going to be the opposite. P is greater than 0.05. That means the p-value could be 0.06, which could be 6% chance of error. It could be 8% chance of error. But the key thing is, like those engineers, they decided on a level of 0.05, 5% chance. And this is the level that psychologists work at. We do not accept higher than a 5% chance of error. You can't say, I'm accepting that my difference was significant between my two conditions and there is an 8% chance that I'm wrong. That's too high a chance. That's like me saying cross the bridge and there's an 8% chance it'll collapse. You're like, no way. I want it to be 5 or less. And that's why have we chosen that? Just because it's pretty strong. Okay, there's no other reason. We're just saying that we want to have a less than 5% chance or equal to 5% chance of significance. Have we made an error? So what do they recommend this time? We recommend you reject the null, and for this one we're 95% sure, but we acknowledge that there is a 5% chance that we've made what's called a type 1 error. A type 1 error is rejecting your null and accepting your alternate, that twins have a significant difference depending on whether they are first or second born, but there's a 5% chance that we're wrong. So this researcher would say, yes, I'm accepting my alternate hypothesis and I'm rejecting my null, but in a peer review, this researcher would say there is a small chance I've made a type 1 error, but it's less than 5%. So I'm happy with that. For this one, it's the opposite way round. This researcher is going to reject their null. Sorry, they're going to accept their null. They're going to reject their alternate. And again, in a peer review, they're going to say, we didn't find anything, but there is less than 5% chance that we made an error, and we should actually have rejected the null. Okay, so depends what your stats test throws at you. If it says you should accept it, or if it says you should reject it. But there's always, if you're working at a peers less than 0.05 level, then there's always a chance that you've made an error. Type 1 errors can be made and are often made. Whenever you evaluate a piece of research, whenever you do that evaluation, you are essentially saying this is where the errors could have occurred. This is Yerkes, who did IQ tests on army recruits in America, and these are the kind of things that he gave them. And if you look at this one, for example, what's missing? Well, what's missing is a net in this game of tennis, but many of the black recruits had never seen a game of tennis before, and he marked them down as being less intelligent as a result of that, when actually it just meant they didn't go to the tennis club on a Friday like some of the white recruits might have. So he suggested there was a significant difference in IQ between black and white recruits. Sorry, the other way around, so black and white recruits. But, he'd made a type 1 error. He was using the significance level of peers less than 0.05, so his stats said yes, there is a significant difference between those two. But that's all stats tests can do. It just tells you, is there a significant difference between those numbers based on the number of participants you've got. And he had a lot of participants, about 1 million participants. So that's all the stats will do. It doesn't highlight the fact that some of your testing conditions are terrible. Some of the design of your research is awful, so no wonder there's a difference. So Yerkes had made a type 1 error, even though he didn't acknowledge it at the time. He didn't realise he had at the time. It was only later, when researchers looked at it, that they said, yeah, you found a significant difference, but it was so biased towards the white recruits that it was a type 1 error. Okay, so type 1 errors are commonly made. So the different levels of probability that we might decide on before we do the research can range. So you can say, for really strict tests, if you're testing a new drug, then you usually want to be extremely, so in the medical world, they have very high levels of significance. So you need to only have a 0.1% chance of making a type 1 error to publish a new drug into the system. You can't say, we've come up with this new aspirin, and there's a 5% chance that it'll kill you, so take the risk. That means 1 in 20 people who take the drug are going to die. So you don't do that. You have to use really stringent levels of probability. For psychology, we're happy with 0.05%, but often researchers, and I'll show you the difference between how researchers do the stats test today compared to back in the day. They used to run stats test to start with at 0.05 and see if it's significant or not, and if it was significant, they might run another stats test at a more stringent level, and if it was still significant, they might run it at another level and use the strongest one in their results. Join me in part 2.